Welcome back to Extra Dirt, the podcast designed to help you and your life group put down deeper roots relationally and spiritually. This week is a challenging week because we're talking about duty, and typically when we talk about duty, we realize all the ways in which we don't stack up. We see, for instance, places in which we have said, hey, it's my freedom as a Christian to do this or that, but I've possibly destructively impacted other people's lives. I might have caused a weaker brother or sister to walk into some sin just because I wasn't being careful enough about the way I behave or speak or dress or whatnot. So it could be challenging in that way. It could be challenging for me to realize, hey, I haven't confronted, so-and-so over the sin they're in, or I haven't forgiven this other person for how they've wronged me. And the temptation is to look at it as just a religious act, a duty that we need to do. But that's not it really at all. What we want you to understand is that God has created us as Christians not to be private Christians, not to be the guy who just reads the Bible and prays and loves Jesus in his heart, and that's the end of the story. We're created with this communal, relational aspect to our being where our faith ought to impact other people. That's why God puts the church together. And so I began to look at my faith not as just I failed or I've succeeded, but how has my faith connected with other people? Have I lived out these duties in such a way that it has been beneficial to my brother or to my sister who has need of that particular place that I play in their walk with Christ? And so we want you to encourage you to look at this as not just like, oh, I've been a good Christian or I've been a bad Christian, but more, how have I impacted those around me? And then to look at it and to say, it's not as far as doing this, it's not so much a matter of I need more faith, but it's really just a matter of putting our faith into practice. Here's what I mean by that. If you took the average politician and they told me to do something and I didn't get it, and I said, well, why should I do it? And they said, well, just trust me and do it. There's no way I would do that. So if a politician isn't going to tell me his reasons, I don't want to get involved in it, right? Because we typically think of politicians as dishonest. How about on the flip side, though? How about if my dad, who I love and trust greatly, says to me, Andy, I need you to do this. And I would say, I don't get it. Why do you need me to do this? And he'd just say, just trust me. Then I would absolutely do it. Because I know that my dad is good and he's loving and he cares for me and he's not going to ask me to do something that is harmful for me. And if we trust Jesus then enough to say, you are my Lord, and enough to confess him as Lord, then our baseline assumption is that God is trustworthy, that God is good, that God can be trusted with my life. So when God asks me to do something little, one specific act of obedience in my life, it would seem a bit ridiculous for me to say, no, God, I trust you with my whole life, but I don't trust you with this little decision. It's backwards. So we already, as followers of Christ, have enough faith, have the faith required to say, you know what, God, if you're good, you have my best interests at heart, I should be able to just obey you and assume that it's going to be for the best. And so really, I'm probably just using that as an excuse to not do something that I don't want to do. So at some point, when push comes to shove, it's just time to obey. We're not lacking what we need. We just got hard hearts and we want to do what we want. And so I push you then to look a little bit outside of these three particular areas and to look at 1 Corinthians 12 and to look at how the church was made with people with different giftings to do different things. Have you considered this idea like your eye cannot perform the job of a foot? It just can't. No matter how hard you try, you can't walk on your eyeball. Your hand is never going to hear anything. No matter what you do to it, it's not going to hear. And so in the church, we're not just interchangeable members of a team where somebody can just fill in for anybody else and do a good job of it. If I picked some random person in the audience to come up and fill in for me and preach on a Sunday morning, it could go okay, but it would probably be a disaster because different parts of the body are gifted differently. If I asked such and such a person to do that and they did a terrible job, it wouldn't be because they're a bad Christian, because they didn't, try hard enough. It would just be because God didn't make them to do that. And it was foolish of us to ask somebody to serve in a capacity for which they were not created. And so We'll ask you then with your group to really consider, how do I fit in the church? It could be a matter of, am I serving in a way that I just wasn't intended to serve? No matter how hard I try, this just never works, right? Maybe that's a sign that you're serving in the wrong spot. Maybe you ought to try something else and see what clicks, see what works, see what God has designed you and created you to do. And you can do that perhaps on a microcosm, really within your life group would be a good place to start with this. You just look around the group and say, hey, what role do you play in this group? What about your personality is different from us that could be used to enrich our group as a whole, to draw us all closer to Christ? Personally, while I love serving people, I'm not a good administrator, and I'm not wired in the way in which I see a service opportunity behind every bush. There is a girl in our life group who really loves to serve and sees all these opportunities and jumps on them and organizes stuff to happen. Her and her husband put these things together, and then we as a group all go out and do it. And it's great and it's wonderful because she's recognized the place in which God has made her heart beat the most strongly, and the ways in which he has gifted her are really geared towards doing that kind of a thing. And we really appreciate it in our group. There might be somebody in your group who is really good at explaining things. And if there's ever a teaching type slot that opens up where something needs to be explained or whatever, you know who to go to. And similarly, you ought to be able to look around your group and say, look, we're just a really awkward group. We never feel comfortable when we get together. Who's got the gift of hospitality? I mean, who could make it their goal just to make this comfortable for us, whether it's an atmosphere in cooking or hosting or whatever? Look around your group and say, do you know where you fit? And if you don't fit, it's not, as verse 20, I believe it's 27 says, it's not because you don't belong. It's because you haven't found the place that Christ intended you to be yet. We're all members of a body. We've all been put here with for a reason. And if you don't know what that reason is, you need to go out and find what it is, not assume that you don't really have a purpose. So we'd encourage you in your life group to find those specific places where together as a smaller group you fit, and then to broaden that and to say, okay, now how do I fit in the church? At large, how does this gifting fit in serving other believers? Because ultimately, God has called me not just to a private faith that happens just in the closet and nobody sees or feels the impact of that, but in a way in which my trust in God and my obedience to God impacts all the people around me and brings joy and brings life and brings health and brings righteousness to those people that God has called me to walk alongside as we all pursue him together. So I'm excited what will happen if your group catches this idea, and I'm excited what will happen if the church catches this idea wherein God has said, look, your life matters for the lives of other people. I don't just want you to be a Christian for yourself. I want you to be a Christian for your neighbor, for your brother, for your sister. Because once that begins to happen, there's this synergistic effect where the sum is greater, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So that's our encouragement for you. Please this week find out where you fit. Learn how to do your duty, not to be a better Christian, but because you understand that God is good and that he's got something good here going on, and he's given you all the power that you need to do it. And so just start making that decision then. Well, I'm going to do what God is dragging me towards or leading me towards. So have a great week, and we will see you around here again back next week.